Like, I understand that I think there are different types of illness. And with a slight comparison, again, using physical examples. And what I mean by physical is diseases that we can see, diseases and illnesses that we can see in our body. Because often, we're only recently learning more about how to navigate mental health and mental illness. For a long time, nobody has talked about that in almost like any community. Nobody's talked about it. And there's been a lot of shame around dealing with mental health and mental illness, whatever it is. And so I'm trying to use physical examples because in a lot of the research that I've had and even my personal experience, people better understand things that they can physically see compared to what you cannot see. So if somebody says, yeah, I deal with severe anxiety, people don't get it. But if somebody says like, I have cancer, people are like, oh, I'm so sorry. I understand. And it's not fully one on one, but we understand that those are illnesses. Both are illnesses. Both impact those individuals. The example that I want to compare it to is the different types of diabetes. I don't know if diabetes is like a trigger word for YouTube. And so I'm trying to be very careful in how I'm communicating this because I understand, one, illnesses of any type is very sensitive and very, very touchy. And so I'm trying to be very careful of how I communicate my thoughts about this subject. Okay. So from my understanding, there are two different types of diabetes. There's type 1 diabetes, and diabetes impacts how people process sugar in their systems. And so how they can process certain foods and things like that. People who wrestle with type 1 diabetes can't do anything about it. They literally, for the most part, to my knowledge, and I mean, a lot of science and technology could have changed in the healthcare over the extent of my life. Because I grew up with a friend who had type 1 diabetes. So there was something in his health, in his body, that didn't function the way it was supposed to. And there was nothing he could really do about it. He had to manage it a certain way. And, for me, which is really, I still remember it to this day, which is really weird. But we would be hanging out or whatever, and he would have to take his blood sugar levels, prick his finger and do all this kind of stuff. And then there were certain cases that he had to take shots and stuff. And so there was a time that he showed me, he was like, okay, this is, got the needle, and he put it in his leg and stuff like that. And he was like, hey, I want you to know how to do this just in case I need your help one day. And I think as kids, it's like, yo, what? You're asking me to stick you with a needle? Like, oh my gosh, man, this is a lot of weight to it. But I cared about him. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to learn. I'm going to figure it out. Even if that's at some point, I got to run and get an adult or whatever. But I understood that he was wrestling with an illness. He was wrestling with a disease that he couldn't change anything about it. It's just part of his life. So that's type 1 diabetes. Then there's type 2 diabetes, which sadly I think is becoming more common, particularly in our community. And oftentimes it is related to issues of poor health. Now, again, I understand there are people who wrestle with diabetes every day, who have to manage diabetes every day, type 1 and type 2. But I also understand that type 2 diabetes has the potential to be reversed and also prevented, depending on how you manage your health. Okay. So both diabetes, type 1 and type 2, are illnesses. They are diseases. They are things that relate to our health. One, you can't really do anything about. It's just kind of in your life. The other, generally speaking, is able to be changed, is able to be reversed, is able to be prevented. So now we have a spectrum. We have a spectrum of illnesses, and we also have a spectrum of health. How am I tying this to mental health? I believe it's the same thing. And one, we need to understand that. We need to get a wider and broader understanding of the gradient of mental health and mental illness. I wish I had a little chart or whatever. But you have mental health, and then you have mental illness, right? So there's a range of mental illness, and then there's a range of mental health. In the whole scope of everything, just like with our health, with our physical health, in the whole scope of everything, we are, as people, responsible, and particularly as Black men, we are responsible with how we manage that range in our physical health and also within our mental health. We are responsible for that. whether that includes just the range of mental health, so managing just the overall general well-being of the state of your mind and your heart, because I think they're the same, and I'll touch on that in a second. They're tied together. And you're also responsible for if you do wrestle with a mental illness or disease, regardless if it's a type 1 or type 2, you're responsible for that. And I get it. Like at some point for my friend, he had to take responsibility for managing his illness. Of course, he had parents that loved him and, were helping him, guiding him through, and who ultimately, up to a certain point, were responsible for him because he was a child. He was born with this illness, disease condition, and his parents had to take care of him up to a certain age where he then is responsible. And, I remember there were times where like he would get fussed out because he's like, why are you doing this? You needed to eat certain foods or whatever. Like you're responsible. His parents were like, you're at the age where you can manage this and you have to be aware of this for your health. You're responsible. You have all the tools. You have everything that you need to be healthy. And I get it. There's a certain point just in general, as we grow up and as we mature, we are held responsible for our lives. And that includes all aspects of our lives, whether it's health, whether it's finances, whatever. Like there's a level of responsibility that we take on as maturing adults, right? My point is that it ties together the same with mental health. And so it's very, very, very important that we as Black men acknowledge that and start taking responsibility for that. We have to be responsible for our mental and emotional health, whether we wrestle with just trying to manage and sustain overall good mental health, or we wrestle with a mental illness. And because of that, because we are responsible, regardless if it's a mental illness or just general mental health, it's not an excuse or a scapegoat to excuse poor or bad behavior. Not at all. And again, like I mentioned, I understand the political game. I understand the way that the system works. It likes to give grace to certain people for the benefit of the machine. That's not right. I don't agree with it, and it's lame. And it's also not acceptable for us. Like there's a room of grace for particular things, right? So if somebody does have severe mental illness, things that they really, really can't control, and it's something that's in their life and they just can't deal with it. The reality is there are people who, if they really are on the extreme, they are, I would say, managed by society in a particular way because they understand that those individuals have no control. The disease and the illness has fully gripped them and they have no control. Those are special cases. And I would beg to say that that's the minority. Even when we can making the comparison of physical conditions that people deal with, there is a minority of people who the severity of the illness and the disease that they wrestle with, they cannot manage it by themselves. So that means they are under special care. They are in hospitals, they're in special facilities because they do not have the power to navigate this thing. Generally speaking, that is the minority of people in the world and people in the society. Those are special cases. Now, for people who just make really bad decisions and who aren't being responsible for managing their health, whether it's physical or mental, those individuals are to be held responsible for their actions. And again, I understand it can get very touchy. Get it. I think it's important, one, that we make the line of demarcation. There are people who it's very severe. Okay. Then there are people who just aren't doing the work to take care of themselves. And I get it. Like we learn, we get better at stuff. Like for me, understanding that I wrestle with depression, now that I'm aware of it and I acknowledge it, it's now my responsibility to manage how I show up in the world, how I show up for myself, how I take care of myself, how when I am in depressive states or, like depressive moods or just not in a good place, I have to do things to make sure that I'm okay and that I'm not impacting those around me. And for those who really do wrestle and who have a desire to actually manage their mental health and well, they make that effort. There was on the show Dave that features little Dicky and like his experience in life or whatever. One of the characters, which is I think his actual like hype man in real life, like their actual friends, Gator. And one of the episodes, it talked about mental illness, and it talked about how Gator wrestles and struggles with bipolar. If I'm not right, if I'm not wrong, yeah, I think he wrestled with bipolar. And so as the show goes on, like you see examples of when he was having really, really highs and really, really lows, because those were the extremes. And for one, a lot of people didn't know how to manage that around him, and in society and stuff, like the community didn't know how to manage that. But at some point, like near the end of the episode, Gator is having one of those situations, because I don't think he took his medicine or something like that. But he expressed and he explained to Dave and the rest of their friends there that, I wrestle with this and it's a real thing. And that was such an amazing episode, because I think it exposed and it shone a light on the reality of mental illness and how it's a struggle for people to manage it, but also how it takes work to manage it. And so at no point was Gator really like making an excuse for it, but he explained and he took responsibility for it. Like, this is what's happening to me. I need you to understand. And like, I'm sorry that these things are happening, but it is what it is. And in that incident, I think that was a great example of how, as people in general, we have to navigate that. Like, there's still a level of responsibility that Gator took, and knowing like, okay, this is what's happening. This is kind of what I'm going through or whatever. And also, having a community around to help support him and to show him love and stuff like that. So when it comes to us as Black men, we have to be responsible for our mental health. We have to do the work to navigate it and make sure that we're in a good place. We have to. If we don't, we're doing a disservice to ourselves and those around us. And it's tricky and it's hard, but we also understand that there are a lot of resources and tools out there to help us be in a better place.